Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to have you all here in sunny Coatbridge. Don't worry, it will get more sunny as the day goes on. Can I introduce myself? My name is Tom Clark, and I'm the Member of Parliament for Coatbridge, Christton, Bellshill, and for those who are here from Cumbernauld, I represent the Blackwood area of Cumbernauld as well. And we're all very, very welcome indeed at this better together meeting. Like you, I'm delighted that we're joined this morning by the Right Honourable Alistair Darling. And like you, I'd like to say straight away, Alistair, you have led the campaign brilliantly. Yes. Now, it's not an accident that we're meeting here in St Patrick's Hall, Coatbridge, but in the Iona Suite. And I would like to mention that because, as we know, one of the greatest socialists and politicians of our time, the late John Smith, is buried there. And John Smith, once my neighbouring Member of Parliament in Airdrie and Shorts, was, I believe, the architect of Scottish devolution. He passionately supported Scottish devolution, and so do we. And John Smith saw this as a process of evolution, and therefore it is right that we who support Better Together and are absolutely committed to further powers for the Scottish Parliament, and who delivered devolution in the first place, remember John Smith and his inspiration. And before our speakers begin, I would like to be afforded just one reflection. I recall that in this very hall, in this room, the Iona Suite, John Smith, having just recovered, perhaps a few months after his first heart attack, came to speak at his first meeting following his illness, and it was to the annual general meeting of the Coatbridge CAB. He spoke on the National Health Service, and I have to say, I have never heard a more eloquent account of a health service delivered by a Welsh politician, Aneurin Bevan, under an English Prime Minister, Clement Attlee, and we are still committed absolutely to that health service today. And one of the reasons why we're fighting this campaign, inviting people to say no thanks, is that we are proud of our public services, including the health service, and I look forward, as you do, to hearing Alistair speak on these matters within a few minutes. However, at the moment, and with great pleasure, I have the opportunity to invite our first speaker, Yvonne Hammer, and I'm not going to say anything more than that, except that this is the people's election, and I'm inviting Yvonne to speak to us as one of the people who will vote in this important referendum. Yvonne.
Thank you very much. Hi everyone, my name's Yvonne, and I'm a mum and I work part-time in a supermarket. But before I go any further, I should probably make a small confession, and I don't know how popular this is going to go down in Coatbridge, but I'm actually from Airdrie. But I strongly believe that the people of Airdrie and Coatbridge are better together. This September, I'll be saying no thanks to separation, because I think that breaking up the UK will be bad for our public services and our household bills. I'm a single mum to Leila, who is starting school this Monday. I work part-time in a supermarket, but I also rely heavily on my working and child tax credits. I know that these credits will be safer in a United Kingdom which pools and shares its resources across 63 million rather than a separate Scotland of just 5 million. I think everyone in this room knows that the costs are high enough, whether it's our energy bills or our weekly shop. A separate Scotland would see these costs skyrocket, and it wouldn't be the likes of Alex Salmond or Nicola Sturgeon feeling the pinch, but normal people like us. But it's not just by pooling and sharing our resources across the UK which keep our costs down. As part of the UK's membership of the EU, we don't pay VAT on our children's clothing. This is a thing that I took completely for granted, but it keeps a few more pounds in our pockets during the back-to-school season. But the SNP have given us no clarity on how an independent Scotland would be applied to the EU, and on what terms. Would we lose our zero rating on VAT, or would we have to adopt the euro? Speaking of the euro, we all saw Alistair Darling thunder away at Alex Salmond a few weeks ago. Time and time again, he asked the First Minister what his plan B was in currency, and he couldn't answer, or he wouldn't answer. I campaigned for Better Together, and one yes voter told me he doesn't care what our currency is. He doesn't care if it's the pound, the euro, or the dollar. He even told me it could be in ginger bottles. Well, that's up to him. But people need to know this isn't like changing your notes when you go on holiday. Our currency will affect everything from our wages, to our pensions, to our bills, to the money we spend in our schools and our hospitals. It could not be more important. And I certainly don't want to risk my family's future in ginger bottles. I'm saying no thanks to separation so Scotland can have the best of both worlds. A strong Scottish Parliament with more powers guaranteed, backed up by the strength, the stability and the security of the wider United Kingdom. That's why I'm delighted to introduce our keynote speaker this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Alistair Darling.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your warm welcome, and Tom for your kind words. Being a politician, I'm not used to people being nice about me, so I'll make the most of it for the next week while. And thank you also, Yvonne, a single mum guest, but also a very good speaker. Who knows, perhaps one day you might consider becoming like this. Perhaps not. But thank you very much for a very sound and articulate view of why we are better together and why we should say no thanks to the risks that come with separation. Now today we've just got 4 full weeks until Polling Day. It's hard to believe that, but that's what it is, only 4 weeks away. And I'm glad to be able to say that we have a great campaign which is focused and it's energetic, and that we're taking our message to every corner of the nation. And in just 2 weeks' time, the first postal votes will drop through the front doors. And the striking thing about the polls over the last 2 years is not how far they've shifted, but actually how little they have shifted, even after 2 years. I want today to talk about the challenges of this final stage of the longest political campaign in our history, and I'll also talk about where we are, what will happen next, and the questions that still remain unanswered even after 2 years. Now, the predictions of a salmon surge remain unfulfilled. All the carefully planned milestones which are supposed to generate a tide of emotional support for breaking up Britain have come and gone. And we know that this is far too big a decision to be decided by emotional spasms. If the nationalists ever thought it would, then they seriously underestimated the common sense of the people of this country. Now, on this side of the debate, we've never made the mistake of taking a single vote for granted. The nationalist politicians thought they could bluff their way through without having to answer even the most fundamental questions on which the future well-being of Scotland will depend. The white paper they produced last year, all 650 pages of it, was billed as answering all the questions, but it actually exposed the nationalist lack of answers. Ask a nationalist politician about the crucial issues that affect all our lives, and you'll be given a page number, but not an answer. A white paper that had just 1 page for just 1 year on our nation's finances. Imagine that. A white paper that has more mentions of Strictly Come Dancing than it does of the whisky industry. A white paper that can tell you our time zone won't change, that's good, but it can't tell you what our currency will change if we vote for independence. If Alex Salmond had £1 every time he was asked about Plan B and failed to answer, he might be halfway to meeting the deficit that he wants to impose in Scotland. It really does beg a belief that a party that has tried to break up Britain for the last 80 years and which has been campaigning in a referendum for the last 2 years still can't answer basic questions on what our currency would be if we were to vote yes. His only answer is to say that he knows what would be best for the country he just walked out on. That's the rest of the UK. It's a position as absurd as it is arrogant. It's a bet on which nobody should stake their job or their pension. But of course it's always somebody else's fault. So last week, when the Governor of the Bank of England was speaking, Mr. Salmond blamed the financial uncertainty on those of us who asked him questions he can't or won't answer. You know, it's a bit like a fox in the chicken coop blaming the hens. But this contortion is mildly compared with what John Swinney said this last week. He said he was having technical discussions with the Bank of England on a currency union. It wasn't true. And the Bank of England took the unprecedented step, I can't remember them ever doing this before, of saying that it was not true. I said at the time, imagine how people would have felt if they'd been casting their postal vote after hearing John Swinney last week, only to find out the next day that what he'd said simply wasn't true. It's that serious. But the Yes campaign have moved into a new phase of desperate deception. Unable to come up with a coherent answer on currency, they now seek to win by frightening people with their own incoherence. A campaign that started by branding their opponents as scaremongers for telling the truth has ended up as the purveyors of threats and doom-laden predictions which owe more to desperation than they do to reality. If you take their claims on the National Health Service, which I find quite objectionable, you'll see what I mean. Now, as Tom was saying, we all owe our National Health Service to people in all parts of the United Kingdom who came through shared interest and inspiration. We owe it a great deal. The National Health Service was built by unity, not by division. The National Health Service owes nothing to nationalism and will not be protected or advanced by nationalism. Health, like education, is entirely devolved to Scotland. The only people who could privatise our NHS right now are the SNP. And despite the fact we've seen a 37% rise in the use of private medicine in Scotland, not even I am accusing them of that. And though the shape of our NHS is devolved, it still draws strength from its links with the NHS throughout the rest of the United Kingdom. Why should we put borders between them when so much of the existing strength that researches medical science, creates expertise, delivers specialist treatments, is drawn from all being part of the same National Health Service and the same country? But they deflect questions because they can't answer them. They can't answer on currency and they can't answer on cuts either. Be in no doubt, Alex Salmond is not offering an end to austerity. He is offering austerity plus. The Independent Institute of Fiscal Studies has estimated that an independent Scotland would have to impose £6 billion worth of cuts or tax rises after a yes vote over and above those already planned. That's the equivalent to half the NHS budget in Scotland. It's around the wages of every doctor and nurse in the country. It's more than we spend on schools in Scotland. It's more than the entire budget for pensions. The greatest fear which we should have about the NHS is how the nationalists would find those £6 billion worth of cuts. So when they spread their scare stories, remember the Bank of England telling you what they said last week was untrue. When they issue their warnings about the NHS, remember you're listening to the fox and the chicken coop blaming the hens. Now there is a better way. Rather than facing the extra £6 billion of SNP cuts which could destroy our NHS, we could come to an arrangement in Scotland where we spend £1,200 more on hospitals and schools for every person in Scotland every year than is spent south of the border. That's an arrangement which would give us the power to have hospitals and schools that we want. In fact, it's an arrangement we have now, because that's what we get as being part of the United Kingdom. So before you listen to them and the claims of the nationalists on public services, ask them to explain a few home truths. How will they provide the standard of schools and hospitals that we all want when they would have to at least cut their budget by £1,200 a year for every man, woman and child in the country? How will we have an NHS when the SNP would have to cut £6 billion from public services? Of course, £6 billion worth of cuts after a yes vote for some is actually an optimistic estimate. Ronald McDonald, the Adam Smith Professor of Economics at the University of Glasgow, conducted an independent analysis which is even more worrying for the future of the NHS, our schools and for all of us. Even if Alex Salmond got his way, which he won't, and got a currency union, Professor McDonald makes it clear that he doesn't think it would last, and he's an internationally renowned expert. He says it would fall apart at the cost of the Scottish economy, which he puts at £100 billion. He predicts then Scotland plunging into a deep 7-year recession. Now, the First Minister has, of course, threatened to use the pound without an agreement when a currency union is refused, just as Panama uses the dollar. Professor MacDonald estimates that to do so, a separate Scotland would have to make cuts of about £12 billion each year, the equivalent of all we spend on the NHS. So the clear and present danger to the NHS in Scotland is Alex Salmond, and Alex Salmond alone. As Professor MacDonald has said himself, the cuts a separate Scotland would have to find would make the current round of cuts look like Christmas. The truth is that separation means cuts, and the nationalist confusion over currency means even deeper cuts. What Alex Salmond is asking Scotland to vote for is austerity plus for decades to come. That's what makes his pitch to Labour voters, that there would be fewer cuts and more wealth redistribution, so cynical. There isn't much in his actual record to support his claim to want redistribution. In the 7 years he's been First Minister, there's not been one policy which redistributes wealth from rich to poor. Indeed, the opposite is true. But the certainty is that the currency chaos he would inflict would lead to more cuts and greater poverty. Let's be clear too, that currency chaos hits the poor harder than anyone. And these cuts would have to be across the board, from schools to hospitals, from pensions to welfare payments, and that would affect some of those vulnerable people in Scotland. Now, my starting point is that I want Scotland to be fairer, more prosperous, and to have greater opportunities. And from that starting point, I come to the conclusion that we're more likely to have the strength to become fairer, more prosperous, and have greater opportunities by working with our neighbours in the rest of the United Kingdom. For the nationalists, the starting point is the desire to leave the United Kingdom. The question of Scotland being fairer, more prosperous, and having more opportunity seems secondary to their core belief. That's why, as the nationalists look with increasing desperation for a game changer that's not coming, there is nothing they won't say or try to say to close a gap in the polls. If anything, its gap has widened. And that's why we must all be aware. We're dealing with a nationalist leader who told us definitively that he had legal advice on a separate Scotland's position in the European Union, when he didn't. He'd never even asked for it. We're dealing with a party whose finance secretary told he was in discussions with the Bank of England about a currency union when he wasn't. And the same man who doubted the affordability of the state pension in private in a document we were never meant to see, but he won't admit it in public. And the same man who in private talks about public spending cuts, but in public will try and play on fears of the poorest and most vulnerable to try and win votes. The truth is, if you believe in a properly funded NHS, free at the point of use, you have to vote for Scotland to remain in the United Kingdom. If you want the best welfare system and pensions you could have, you must see that it's better to base a welfare system on the strength of 60 million people rather than just 5. If you want Scotland to prosper and our children and the generations to come to the best opportunities they can, then you should join me in the business of tearing down barriers and borders, not putting them up. What you shouldn't be in the business is dismantling our economy, our financial system, our NHS, our welfare system, and then trying to rebuild them with fewer parts. Makes no sense. Instead, we should use the strength of the United Kingdom to make Scotland stronger. And I think we can put that case forward with confidence and with optimism, because it is the best way to serve Scotland, and our country knows it. And that's why the movement and momentum are with us. With just 2 weeks to go until the first postal vote is cast, our task is to turn the steely determination of the majority of Scots to stay in the United Kingdom into votes. Votes to work with our neighbours, votes for keeping the best of both worlds, and votes to make Scotland stronger. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Alistair. As you heard, we very much appreciated everything that you've had to say. Now, friends, we're going to open the meeting for questions. The plan is that we take 3 at a time and see how we get on, and Alistair will respond, and then we'll move on, take another 3, and so on. So, who wants to come in first? The gentleman there, you wait for a second, then the gentleman there, and the lady. We've got a lady? Not yet. Well, we'll take the gentleman there. Okay. 1, 2, 3. 1.
Mr. Darling, a couple of questions. Very basic. Why better together? Well, I think there's 2 reasons recently. The banking crisis from the start. What I understand, the money that took to help the banks out is more than the Scotland completely right. A more recent one was Grangemouth. The last year we suffered a great effect by Grangemouth nearly closing down. Now, what I can understand is when we finally Scotland, they get to the oil. We weren't better together in the house company shelf, and the best place is better together, but oil will come to next one. Right, so that's 2 points I'd like to raise.
Thank you. Gentleman here.
Alistair, thanks a lot for Tuesday night. That was wonderful. But anyway, why is it we're not able to nail the nationalists on the Plan B? Who's got the answer? Who's going to tell us exactly that they can't get it? There seems to be this dubiety about, yeah, but we can if we negotiate this or that, and then on the other hand they're saying, yeah, oh no, you'll not be able to negotiate at all because it's not up for grabs with other three political parties. Where do we get, how can we not get a definitive word on it that kills the argument?
Alistair, the gentleman here.
I'm going to go unpopular. I have been to 3 yes undecided events. I could have been to another 3 more. This is the first Better Together event I have been able to attend. The only reason I was able to attend it is because I knew someone that could get me an invite. I tried to get to Joanne Lamont's meeting last week. I talked to Rob Murray from the Better Together campaign, who told me that Better Together prefers meetings in the open air, fresh air, outside the stuffy rooms. Here we are in the stuffy room. I am neither Cybernat nor Pro. I'm a teacher from Glasgow. I have not. This is the first opportunity I have had. Right, here it is. Here is my point.
Hold on.
Here I told you I was going to go unpopular. Here is my point.
With great respect, can we have your question, please?
What democratic legitimacy does an event like this have when it is by invitation only in an undisclosed location, and when a progressive democratic person like me, who is neither Cybernat nor Pro, can... You laugh. My name's John Colley, I'm a teacher in Whitehall. Those are my credentials to tell you that I'm neither Cybernat nor Pro. What democratic legitimacy does such an event have 5 weeks before the election?
I think we've got the point.
Okay.
Now, Alistair.
Right. Look, I'm sorry if you've had difficulties coming to meetings before. We have done a lot of meetings, one way or another, up and down the country. My view is any meeting is democratic by its very nature. People come along and have the say as you have today. Now, let me deal with the 2 other questions. Your first question on, I suppose it's the security, the greater insurance we have being part of the United Kingdom. And you were talking about the banks. I remember in October 2008, I took the only phone call in my life that had ever sent a shiver down my spine. And that was from the then chairman of RBS. And RBS at that time was the biggest bank in the world. And he phoned me on a very wet, rainy morning. It was one of the banking crises was in full swing. And he said that the RBS was hemorrhaging money. There were billions were going out the doors. It was a terrible run on the biggest bank in the world. And he said, what are you going to do about it? And I thought, well, I thought you were paid large sums of money to know what to do about it. But I said, we can do something about it. We've got a plan, because the Bank of England always does have plans for this. I said, how long can you last? And what he said is what shook me. He said, about 3 hours. Now, if that bank had shut, the doors had closed, his cash machines had gone off, a lot of the supermarket money, the money you pay in this RBS cleared all that stuff, there would be an absolute chaos and absolute panic. Now, I could do something about it, because at that time, RBS's worth, if you like, was roughly equivalent to the whole wealth of the United Kingdom. So we were big enough to do something about it. We also had to do the same thing with HBOS at the same day, and we stopped the banking collapse. My counterpart in Ireland had no such luck. They had 3 banks in trouble. They guaranteed the deposits in that, and you saw what happened. Ireland just collapsed under the weight of it. You mentioned Grangemouth. There's 2 things I would say about Grangemouth. One is what happened last year. Just demonstrates how open countries are to decisions of people who are pretty footloose in the international world. They could do business in Grangemouth, but equally they could do business somewhere else. And that's something where actually a sizable country has some advantage in terms of negotiation. But on top of that, the money that was provided to ensure that that plant stays open came, yes, from the Scottish Government, but also from the UK Government as well. And I think that joint effort and the security that came from the part of the UK is a very eloquent description of where we gain. I hope there isn't another banking collapse. I certainly hope we don't have another episode of Grangemouth again. But you never know what's going to come along and get you. And being a bigger country, you are much better placed than if you were a smaller country. Now that sort of brings me on to your question about Plan B. You asked, when's Alex Salmond going to tell us when Plan B is? My guess is not before the 18th of September. Because the problem he's got is the 4 alternatives to the currency union are equally unpalatable. I mean, joining the euro is about as popular in Coat Bridge as it is in Essex. Nobody really wants to do it, because you see what's happening in the eurozone just now. Starting a brand new currency when no one knows what it would mean, what would it be worth, what would your savings be worth, what difference would it make in terms of your weekly shop and so on, that's not very popular either. And it seems to me that using somebody else's currency is fraught with difficulties. Panama uses the US dollar, but it's got no say over what happens. Someone else, another country decides your economic policy. The other thing is, if you've got to using somebody else's currency, you have to store up masses of reserve currency, which means cuts, because you can't spend the money twice. And then, in the creating the currency union, it wouldn't be good for Scotland. It would lock us into somebody else, what would then be a foreign country's economic policy. That's not independence. It's also bad for Scotland. What I think really beggars belief from Salmond's point, he says he knows what's best for the rest of the UK too. He says, of course they would like to go into currency union, but why do they want to go into currency union where they would have to underwrite a banking system in Scotland which is regulated by somebody else? And you can see why it isn't going to happen. Now, he's got a problem because his whole pitch to Scotland is, don't worry, everything's going to change, but nothing's going to change. Well, you can't have it both ways. And the reason I asked him at the debate a couple of weeks ago what his plan B is because he did actually say a few weeks earlier he had a range of alternatives. So I was just curious. I thought, well, let's find out. Because everybody in life knows whatever you do, you've always got a fallback position. You've always got a plan B. And to say, here you are, you're talking about the future of Scotland, and you have no idea what money we'll be using, that just seems to be mad. You wonder if he's serious about it.
Thank you.
Okay, can we move on to another 3 questions? And we have a lady here. You've had your say, so you're not going to disrupt this meeting. Does the meeting agree that we go on to another 3 questions from 3 people who have not attended? Following the instructions of the meeting, the lady here, another 2, the lady here, and the lady here. Brilliant. Okay, lady here first.
Hi there. You were just talking about Plan B there, and how you should always have a contingency plan. One of my main concerns seems to be that a lot of our hopes are kind of pinned on a Labour government winning the general election in 2015. Opinion polls at the moment are showing that neither Labour nor the Conservatives have enough to gain a majority government. I'm a little bit nervous that if there is a no vote and we do end up with a Tory government, what are the Scottish Better Together political parties? What's your plan B for protecting Scotland from more Tory austerity in 2015 and beyond?
Okay, now the lady over here.
The youth campaign on the Defence No Subsiding, what happens when families in business are paying the jobs and the income from that?
And then the lady here.
I think very eloquently spoke about the NHS here, and I think it's one of the things you really have to hammer home between now and referendum day is just the blatant scaremongering of the people. And when you hear stories of their campaigners going into areas telling people who can vote, no, it's going to cost you £10 to visit your GP, it is scaremongering at its absolute worst. Nobody in the UK has any intention of privatising healthcare. For all their open contracts in England, it is still funded for by the government and is free at the point of use. I think it's something we really have to strongly get across to the entire population. The NHS is safe, no matter who's in control, because no political party in the UK has any mandate or any will to privatise the NHS, and it's scaremongering at that point.
Right, let me deal with the three questions in the order in which they're put, and we'll deal with your point first, which I suppose is the democratic argument in some ways. And I was saying the other night, I suppose like many people in this room, I didn't vote for Alex Salmond, but I'm stuck with him. I certainly didn't vote for David Cameron and Nick Clegg, and at the moment I'm stuck with them until May next year. Now, nobody can see, you'd be a very brave person to call the result of the election next year. I did see a poll this week which showed that Labour is up 7 points. Which obviously from my point of view is very encouraging. But you know, I think the important thing is that in general elections, we all get a chance to vote, whether it's the Scottish Parliament or the UK Parliament, and there will be times when our party doesn't win. But every 4 or 5 years, the thing comes up again. Whereas this question, the independence question, is if we vote to leave, there is no going back. You have bought a one-way ticket to an uncertain destination, and that's why I think there is a difference. But I also, as I was saying just earlier on, I do think that if you compare what you can get from the UK in terms of spending per head, in terms of the NHS, which I'll come on to in just a moment, it's far greater than the risks that all come from saying, well, we're going to split away. My argument is that the national state, you can be protected if you vote for independence. What independence brings is a whole bunch of different risks which affect the amount of money we can spend on things like schools and hospitals. I'll come back to the NHS in a moment, but before I do have your point about Trident and defence and so on. Opinion in Scotland is pretty divided on Trident, actually. All talking about opinion polls, it's 50-50, bluntly. In a very uncertain world, you look around what's going on at the moment, that's why I err on the side of keeping that deterrent. But you asked about jobs. There are 8,000 jobs dependent on submarine work on the Clyde, not just Trident. The conventional fleet is well on the way to being based on the Clyde. And that, as I speak to you today, we have sadly seen the closure of the last, merchant yard on the River Clyde. It really is a very sad day. But we still have 2 yards building Royal Navy ships, and we have the jobs on the Clyde. Now, given not just the fact that we need to employ as many people as possible, but the skills of people who depend indirectly on all these jobs, I don't see the risk of saying, well, let's shrug our shoulders and say goodbye to it. I just think that's daft. And now if you come back on to the NHS point, as I was saying earlier on, north and south of the border, whether it's the SNP, whether it's the present government, they provide some of the NHS care through the private sector. Indeed, neither government could meet the operation targets and so on if they weren't using it. At the moment, the reason that there's been a 37% increase in private sector use in Scotland under the Nationalists is because that's the only way in which they can meet the waiting time targets for operations and so on. And my view about this, I'm philosophic about it. If you've got someone waiting for an operation, they might be in pain. What matters is they're getting the best possible care, and it's free. It's free at the point of use. That's the whole central point of the NHS, which makes our NHS the envy of the world. And the other thing about it, of course, is that healthcare in Scotland is totally devolved. The only people who can change it one way or another is whatever government happens to be in Holyrood. And it's interesting that in the last Scottish elections, Alex Salmond himself said in the manifesto the NHS is safe in Scotland because it's devolved. And Thursday he said he was going to have a new constitution guaranteeing the safety of the NHS. When he published the draft constitution in June, it wasn't mentioned. We know what's going on here. They're not winning on the currency. They're not winning on the big economic arguments that will actually decide all of our future. So they're starting to come back to scare stories basically, and it's pretty desperate stuff. And I think people are seeing through it.
Now we move on to another 3 questions from somebody who's not asked so far. the gentleman here, the gentleman there, and the gentleman next. Okay. 1, 2, 3.
Coming back to the currency union, I was reading a few weeks ago that the majority of people down in England would be against currency union with Scotland if they separate. And even more importantly, Alex Salmond's friend, the First Minister of Wales, said that he would veto any currency union because it would leave Wales at a disadvantage. So that really, the ball's up in the plate for them really. When he starts talking about they're only bluffing, it's rubbish, absolute rubbish.
The gentleman up here.
Well, so I'm starting to hear you talk about austerity and austerity plus. Like the lady over there, I've also heard the stories of the Nats coming into the council estates in Airdrie and scaring people about welfare cuts and all that. So I think that's welcome that everybody call out austerity plus. I'd also like to mention thanks to all the Better Together activists in the Airdrie Shorts. They've been out for the last 3 months, 3 nights a week on the doorstep down the Wirral. So there's a lot of them in the room today, so I'd like you to call that out. And tied into that, finally, I think we need a call to arms here. It's 4 weeks to go. You guys are doing the job. Rob Murray, the guys at the HQ are doing the work. So we need a call to arms here. We need activism here. We need everybody in this group to go out there, spend a couple of weeks on the doorstep or down the main street, talk to folks. That's it.
Time with the man in the pink shirt.
This is my political credentials. Mr. Darling, the No campaign is got a head of steam. They'll probably do it this time. Is it not that we're lucky that we're in the middle of a recession, the Eurozone's in disarray, and we now have growth in the UK? Had we been in an expansionist era of the Euro, and had we still the Celtic Tiger, and had we still the Ark of Prosperity, would we be in a different position? And when is the next referendum? Are we going to be in a position where we are having never-endings?
Let me start off with that point. I don't know if you saw, there was a poll in the Sun on Monday which shows us as a DCV. I thought one of the most interesting things is that over 40% of us said we never ever wanted to have a referendum ever again. I think quite the next largest group were and said not for the next 30 years. And I don't know about you, but I would like to see a law passed that says that you can't have a referendum campaign lasting 2.5 years. It has just gone on and on and on. And the thing that does annoy me is that all the time we're discussing the Constitution, we're not discussing how we can improve our healthcare, how we can make our education system better, how we can improve transport, all the things that matter to people, because constitutions are not an end in themselves to me, they're a means to an end. It's how do you best provide all these services. So I hope the answer to your question is that we win and we win well. I think the point you make about the Ark of Prosperity, well, you don't hear that mentioned too much now, since 2 bits of it are not doing terribly well in Ireland and Iceland. I think the thing about the Euro, when we discussed these things 10 years ago, I was against joining the Euro because I can't see how you can get a currency union that is at all democratic when you've got lots of different countries under someone else decides their budget. That's what's going on in Europe at the moment. That's why I can't understand it. If you're a nationalist, why do you go into an agreement where your budget has to be approved by another country? And you've got no say because you're not in the Parliament anymore. I mean, it just seems to me to be daft. From a nationalist point of view, never mind anything else. Which I suppose takes me on to your point. Yes, all the polls have shown that the majority of people in the rest of the UK are against the currency union. So when we hear about Alexander going on about the sovereign will of people in Scotland, I agree that sovereignty and the will of people in Scotland is important. But you can't believe that and not also believe that in England they've got a right to sovereignty as well. They've got to decide what's best for them. Carwyn James, the First Minister of Wales, has said that. He's also, by the way, said that if Scotland thinks for 1 minute it can charge Welsh students tuition fees and not charge the French and the Germans and the Italians, they've got another thing coming, and he's dead right about that. Which brings me to your point. Firstly, let me say too that one of the most encouraging things in the last 2.5 years is the fact that we have 200 groups up and down Scotland, like yourselves, who have been out several times a week, meetings, knocking on doors, making phone calls, whatever. And that's important because getting the vote out is absolutely critical. You know, these opinion polls are all very interesting. You know, they're great to look at, but you know, they can be wrong. You know, I've always said this is going to be, you know, this is going to be a tight fight. What matters is the people who cast their votes by post, and there are millions of people in Scotland now who will be doing that. And as I said to you earlier, 2 weeks from now, those postal votes will be coming through the front door, and then the majority of people will then be voting on the 18th of September, just 4 weeks away. So there's a great job of work to be done. But you're also right in relation to what the Nationalists are saying to people who understandably are concerned for themselves, their families, as well as for their country. You know, what the Nationalists are going to visit on Scotland, if we vote for this, is austerity plus. It's not less austerity, it is austerity plus. It's more, because of all the reasons I set out. Currency difficulties, the fact that not me, but independent experts, like the Institute of Fiscal Studies, which are recognised internationally as being pretty good at their job, £76 billion black holes got to be filled there somewhere, half of what we spend on the health service. So austerity plus is a massive threat to us. So yes, I hope that you and all your colleagues are doing everything you possibly can, like we all will be in the next 4 weeks. We've come 2.5 years, it's not long to go now, you can see the finishing post, and just think how you'll feel on the 19th when you wake up and hopefully you say, well, I played my part in that. Yes.
Yes.
Now, I know that time's running on, and I know that people are very keen to campaign in their own areas, and we encourage that. So I think, if I'm right, we've time for maybe another 3 questions. Okay? Right. Now, people who've not spoken before, over here, the lady here, and finally, well, there are 4, so we'll take 4. The gentleman there, and finally the gentleman there, and then I'm afraid we have to conclude so folks can go on with the campaign. All right?
I'm not trying to ask this question in terms of being selfish, but I'm assuming that I'm not going to be the only person that will be in this position. But I work for a very small company in England. It's a consultancy job. I'm up and down the UK. I've got quite a few colleagues who are based down there, and I can't be the only person in Scotland that works for a small company down in England. And they're already asking me what are my views and how am I going to vote. And in the background, I'm wondering, if going through their heads, they're thinking, well, how can we cope with the administration and all the changes that could be involved in having to have me continue to be an employee of theirs going forward, working for a separate country. And I haven't really come across, and maybe I can say I'm being selfish here, but I haven't come across a lot of discussion about how that will impact on small businesses in England who will have to take on that extra cost of having me work for them.
Okay, and the lady here.
I'd like to I know it's a lot of people, but I'm quite worried about defence for Scotland. If the vote goes against us and they take Trident away and there is no military authority in this country, we do live in a world now where countries are we see the state of Syria, Iran, Iraq. You know, it's not impossible to think that there might be something unrest in this side of the world. Who's going to defend Scotland? Who's going to look after us?
And the gentleman up here, and finally the gentleman at the front.
My comment is also about Trident. Could it be that the Scottish Nationalist position on Trident timescale, which we were told earlier this week was totally unrealistic, it would take 12 years or thereabouts to move it, is that perhaps a bargaining chip in order to say you can keep Trident for 12 years and we will have the pound?
Yeah.
Okay, and our last question.
Okay, can I just make a quick comment? I think the head-to-head between you and Stammen, Alistair, Stammen more than met his match on that night, and I think we will do it again for BBC. My question is, if Scotland is so wealthy, why is Stammen begging, pleading to be part of the pound? Why doesn't he have his own currency?
Well, let me just start with that point. It's worth bearing in mind that in Scotland we have some very, very successful companies, large and small. We actually have some of the best universities in the world. But they all owe their success to the United Kingdom because of the United Kingdom, not despite it. And I can't see why he'd want to break away from all that. And, you know, why doesn't he say, well, Scotland will have its own currency? That's what Solis wants, that's what others in the Nationalist campaign have said as well. I think because Alex Salmond knows full well that if he stood up and said that, a lot of people start thinking, hold on, what's my money worth now? And, you know, that's, you know, any Scotland will be a new kid on the block. Again, in partial observers have said you'll pay an interest rate premium for that. All governments have to borrow, and that's important. Can I now turn to the defence, and I'll come back to your point. Firstly, on the Trident point, I saw the report last week, which said, firstly, it would cost, I think, between 2 and 5 billion. Now, as a former Chancellor, I'm very suspicious of people who come along and say you could get all this for only 2 to 5 billion. That's what they told me about the Olympics. They were only going to cost 2 to 5 billion pounds, and I said, well, okay, that sort of sounds all right. When the final bill came in, it was a wee bit more than that. The Olympics were well worth the money, but you've got to be sceptical about the idea you can shift all this to, I know not where, for that. What I thought was really striking was that they said that the more realistic timetable was 2028. Now, I don't know about anyone in here, that seems a long time away. And, you know, I understand, you know, there are people who have very strong feelings about Trident missiles. So I do find it very odd that you can be against nuclear weapons, but you then want to join an alliance that is based on nuclear defence, which is what NATO is. I don't think it's a bargaining chip at all. I think it's just one of the contradictions. But coming back to your point, you know, in many ways we live in the most uncertain and unstable times since the Second World War. You know, when I look around the world just now, I'm filled with trepidation. When I look, you know, when we assumed that when the Soviet Union collapsed, that we're going to enter into a new era, you know, where we didn't have to worry about, you know, all these things, and we see what's going on in Ukraine at the moment. You know, actually, people are worried. And you mentioned the Middle East, where every day brings stories of fresh atrocities and fresh horrors. It is an uncertain world. And, you know, we've been talking about nuclear defence, but remember, most of what we do is conventional defence, peacekeeping and so on. The great thing we have in the British Army, the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force is you have an integrated defence system that recognises probably the best in the world, because they're highly trained, you know, they perform well, and you know, I don't see why it makes any sense to break that up. You know, the idea again, there was a separate Scottish Army and Navy or Air Force now. You'd have to create something new with all the bureaucracy and all the difficulties and the loss of skills. Because a lot of people who join the British Army because that's what they joined the British Army, because of everything that entails. So, you know, I agree with you on that. And we'll come back to, you know, the practical arguments, and you don't apologise for raising your own position. Everybody considers their own position, you know, when it comes to a vote. Yeah. And indeed, the most compelling arguments, I suspect, around the kitchen table or in the sitting room are, well, what's it mean for me? And for a lot of us, you know, older than you, for our children and grandchildren, because we're not talking about the next 4 years, we are talking about the next few lifetimes. And if you look at someone like yourself, it may be a hassle to travel, but you can work in any part of the UK. You have the same national insurance system, the same tax system. Your employers or whoever you're working with doesn't have to worry about that extra layer of bureaucracy. The minute it becomes more expensive to hire someone, then the natural thing the employer will do is say, well, I'll go to where I can get paid slightly less. And then for a lot of small businesses, the idea of having different VAT systems, because you're having to account to a Scottish exchequer and a UK exchequer, depending on where your sale points were and all the rest of it, it makes no sense. And I'm struck by the fact that, you know, one advantage of 2.5 years is I've visited quite a lot of small firms. How many small firms in Scotland actually depend upon the rest of the UK for their market, or depend upon it to get the component parts to build whatever they're building? And you just ask yourself, suppose we weren't in the UK just now, wouldn't a lot of people be arguing for tearing down barriers and borders and boundaries rather than putting the things up? It doesn't make any sense for us as a nation, but individually, and that is what this is about, individually it makes no sense for us either, which is why don't apologise for it. You know, I think the final thing I would say is that it is also striking that, not surprisingly, the interest in the rest of the UK has been less than this in Scotland, but a lot of people are now focusing on the decision we're going to take in, you know, the next few weeks. And a lot of people are saying, why on earth would you do it? Why do you give up the strength and security? We can be better and stronger together. So you're absolutely right to raise that.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Clark, I've not disrupted the meeting, Mr. Darling.
I'm sorry, sir.
Look, see, in the interest of democracy, might I be allowed to have a say in what is nothing more than a Labour stick
You
up in the
had a
next election? I've had one question.
That Coatbridge will be neither bullied nor intimidated into the... I am now proposing to thank those who have made this an excellent meeting, and I want to begin by thanking the organisers, mainly young people who worked tremendously, long days and nights since this campaign began, and with a long time still to come. They're doing a great job. They're entitled to respect and tolerance from all of us, and I invite you to thank them. I would also like you to join me in thanking. I want to thank Yvonne for her wonderful introduction, speaking on behalf of the ordinary women of Airdrie, and don't they deserve our respect as well? I want to thank all of those people who put questions, all of them, and that might include some who might have come along thinking they would disrupt our meeting, and I want to say to them frankly, the more they do that, the more they add to the no vote, and I thank you for that. Finally, as we continue this campaign, and we will continue to fight for the Scotland that we love, knowing that patriotism is not the monopoly of one group. The Scotland that we love. And because we love Scotland, we want to say a profound and deeply felt thanks to Alistair Darling for the wonderful job he's done this morning, and for the great job we know he will continue to do.
I was in the Oh, me too. Is Hello? That's it, I'll tell you, I was at the front. Right? Should hand them in the counter. Who's Sally's friend?
I think I might just come around the corner.
Well, actually, do the kitchen part after at the moment, talking about the police and I'm happy to do it.
Always
wonder how he's going to change it for there. That guy over there. Daddy's uncle, my man's uncle, was sitting right on there, like, going, there's a guy there. No, I think there's 4 or 5 people very near. You can tell us around people went with the squad and things but the guy only asked the question, then he hadn't answered it, and he said, he stopped in the meeting. I asked the question, I didn't answer my question. Told him to get out.
Aye, you better together.
At the front. Did he?
You better together, baby. Excellent, excellent. Who you better together? Who you better together, baby?
You're right. After right enough, isn't it? Together, no, we won. Oh, we got in. How did it go?
That was great.
One is, I asked a question and they asked him why he was getting influenced. But did you say when the young family, stronger, bigger, non-speaker? This is right across the road there. Revenue building should keep a jump round the side. Is this why we're better together? Was he jumping on it?
They're together to the exclusion of all others, even those with tickets can't get in. Better together to the exclusion of half of Scotland, or to the most of Scotland.
Big McMahon sort of. I heard the blonde.
There's massive.
So this is just normal people again.
I know you can't walk water, I can assure you that.
What did she say?
She says, I'm no Christ. I just says, oh Christ. She says, I'm no Christ.
She says, I'm born Christ?
No.
Yeah, but about? The guy says, why can't we get in? It's so top secret and all that. They didn't like it, so we sit down and get it. And excommunicated. Well, see, we were walking up, I said, how are you going to get one? The house people. There's a woman there that comes into my work.
Elaine asked her a question.
I had it right in front of me, so we just speak to see when he was asking the questions. Hopefully I've got a minute. I don't know who it was, but they got together called Sweetheart. I was actually called because there was a crowd of people shouting at him. And I went, you're notorious. I said, me and her, I said, there's 2 lasses sitting down there in a cafe. What did they say? The policeman went, 40? And I went, aye. They're wasting time then, somebody because you get they said there was a crowd echoing them. And I said, no,
getting raped and everybody does in the football
does not constitute a crowd. I got paid and died. We're doing an STV and STV guys and they'll be an Gallery's coming back. I wonder how... Oh, George Gallery? Is it?
I think it was a joke, I want to laugh. It's in Westminster. He resigned for the faculty advocate. I'm just, you're laughing, you're walking.
I'm wondering, you know, what's the deal?
No, it's great, and that's I'd give it 6 weeks, but more time